You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Kivelevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. You've bought your tickets. The ushers are about to open the doors. Yes, the Projectionist has Semicha is about to start. But first, you've heard me on this platform touting NRS, a great company whose many dedicated employees I get to see in action. NRS Pay has recently launched its new cost-cutting program called Cash Discount. The way it works is any vendor using NRS Pay Cash Discount has their sale register tabulating automatically a dual pricing, which offers customers a choice of a cash payment, which could result in up to a 4% discount over swiping their card. If your business meets the $18,000 a month threshold, there's absolutely no monthly fee to incur. NRS Pay Cash Discount makes it less expensive to accept credit cards, so you'll save money while helping your customers save at the same time. NRS is offering a time-limited deal right now on this state-of-the-art system. You'll get a free card reader with 0 hidden fees, no long-term contract, and no early termination fee, which means you can switch your processing plan without penalty. NRS Pay is a proud part of the IDT Corporation that I've been associated with for over 10 years and has integrity built into its corporate DNA. I know its founder and officers and salespeople, and they truly stand by their product and will help you with live stateside-based customer service on any issue or question. Check nrspay.com for more information or call 833-289-2767. And now here's the Projectionist as Semicha. Enjoy. Clear the aisles. The Projectionist as Semicha. Hi, I'm here with Rabbi Kolakowski. The blockbusters are back after COVID sort of crushed the whole idea of going to the movies last weekend. People ran to the movies again. Some people even went for double features. They went to see Greta Gerwig's incredible feminist super fantasy called The Barbie Movie. Then afterwards, they took a break and went to see Christopher Nolan's 3-hour incredible biopic of J. Robert Oppenheimer entitled just Oppenheimer. Everyone's saying this summer is the summer of Barbenheimer. Everybody is saying, oh, these are two great movies, and now people are back again. So, on the urging of my good friend Rabbi Kolakowski, we decided that Projectionist has Semicha is going to do their own old version of Barbie Oppenheimer, where we are going to talk about Robert Oppenheimer being played by the incomparable Hugh Cronin, a film that was pretty much ignored for many, many years, but is available for free on the Internet Archive and on YouTube. First, let's talk silliness. Let's talk about Barbie. You have a doll who is living in a doll land and is affected by the way their owners are playing with them, somehow is able to enter the real world. And again, it's the typical fish out of water, the dissonance type of situation. And she is accompanied by a goofball played by Ken, played by Ryan Gosling.
It makes me think of the Brady Bunch movie that was back in the 90s. It was like kind of the fish out of water.
I will just tell you that someone who I believe is probably the greatest television personality, and that in terms of variety television personality, and that means Red Skelton and Danny Kaye and Milton Berle and Benny and Hope really have to take a backseat, and that is to the incomparable, incredible Carol Burnett. Carol Burnett did a skit. It is available. You can find it on YouTube for free. It's a skit that I think it was done in maybe the first or second year of the program. And it probably has more laughs in it than the whole Barbie film. It's a skit about a little girl who has a Barbie. Mattel, obviously, they were worried about Mattel deciding to sue them. But this is really like a Mad Magazine type of little shtick where a little girl who is playing with her dolls, and then the camera shifts to the dolls, and the dolls, of course, are Carol. Carol is Barbie, and Harvey Korman is not Ken, but Ben. And they are on this bed, and the jokes are about Ken is obviously just desirous of Barbie, and Barbie is clearly a little bit of a strumpet herself. There's jokes about her being bendable. There's jokes about Ken peaking when her clothes get changed. There's jokes about the amount of clothing that she has, even though she doesn't have a certain type of outfit. There are intimations about, how she wants something more than just Ken. The dynamism in the skit is that the little girl then brings in a GI, not GI Joe, but GI Jack. And that's played by Lyle Wagner. And of course, Barbary does not want to get out of bed when she is next to GI Jack. And again, it's this idea of a doll being a plaything, but also clearly in the form of a real live human with human desires. And Carol does a great job indicating the sort of lasciviousness that lies beneath the whole Barbie phenomena. Lyle Wagner does a great job as G.I. Joe, who has nothing on his mind except serving America an apple pie, despite what Barbie wants from him. There's a joke about Ken not having served in the army because of his flat feet. Barbie is wearing heels. Barbie's legs bend when she tries to hug G.I. Jack. And really, in 5 minutes, really does a number on Barbie and kids that play with these dolls. And of course, the ending, spoiler, they bring in a fourth doll that grandma has brought to the little girl, and the fourth doll played by Vicki Lawrence, who, when this skit was done, had not yet really developed her acting chops. And she just is lying there. And when they say hello to her, when she says that she is the Betsy Wetsy doll, all three of them run out of the bed. So you have your typical late 1960s humor, a little bit edgy. And there you have, I think, more than enough about the Barbie phenomena. What would imagining Barbie and Ken? They say Ryan Gosling stole this movie. I recommend our listeners check out Harvey as Ken. I think he does quite a nice job there. And really, this is really an excuse for me to talk about Carol, because I think that not only was she so gracious, as this scene indicates, her immense talent, but also her graciousness. One of the things that Sid Caesar was accused of, despite his enormous talent, was the fact that his ego was fantastically large. He had the greatest writers for him in what was considered the greatest variety skit program in television history. But I only know that Sid Caesar, after his show was off the air, when he was doing so many guest starring on shows like Carol Burnett and other programs, although you could see how talented he was, you can see what he was able to do, you also saw that you never really were able to see him as an accepting, giving, relatable human being. Carol could do any voice, any shtick, whether playing mousy or sexy, playing silly, brilliant, stupid, English, French, Russian, anything you ask her to do, she was able to do and deliver it. She never delivered less than a B+ performance in any of the skits that she did. But the main thing I really want to stress about, and especially as this is a period that Yitzhak and myself, we think about how the world can be better, how we could perhaps our interpersonal relationships could be elevated. And I would like to suggest, not by going to see Barbie and hearing the new feminist claptrap or the old feminist claptrap again, but rather by just watching Carol. Watch Carol in her openings. I haven't seen any host of a program relate to the audience in as an honest and real way as what she does. And of course, this started, I think, as just sort of like a lark, as an idea. And when, her husband, Joe Hamilton, and others, they saw what was going on, they figured to append it to the program. Now, of course, the program, just like many programs in the mid-1960s and afterwards, were a combination of live and taped performances. The audience that you see and that's laughing and clapping aren't watching the same program that we were at home. They were watching parts of it, but other parts of it were taped in different times during the week and then stitched together. And Carol opened the lights and spoke to them, and she was quick on her feet. She was able to answer questions with humor, with sometimes brilliant comebacks, but more often than not, with empathy, with understanding, with connections, with actual being shocked, laughing, and her infectious laugh, her ability to denigrate herself, to put herself down, to be herself, to be a person, and to accept the love and presence of the audience. I really believe, Yitzchak, that she can be a musar shmooze, as we say, for everyone. How is someone who is already elevated and loved and almost worshipped, how can they show themselves to be honestly just a person of the people? So often throughout the program, not just in the opening, she reveals herself to be starstruck when there's someone of such great talent. You can see also her eagerness to highlight performers in the mid to late 60s who were Black, Hispanic, and others, to really give them a chance to shine. And none of it was done with hitting yourself over the head with it. There were a couple of skits where she, especially a famous one that she did with Sammy Davis Jr., where she indicated the ugliness of liberal racism, where someone who thinks that they are giving to the Blacks and wanting to help them is really guilty of racism. It's a classic skit. But again, even if all you see from Carol are those openings, but it's a wonderful time machine if you want to see the hairstyles, the attitudes, even the you can see children on the cusp of what was that late 60s and 70s wildness period, but still having the respect and care, especially in the presence they would give to Carol. Most of them were connected to the famous character that she created on the Gary Moore show, which was the Char Woman. And that was what she would do. She could really match Keaton and Chaplin in some ways for the pantomime that she did, because she spent the first part of the Char Woman mute. Her willingness to be able to display herself as an ugly duckling, and yet, incredibly, when she was supposed to play a starlet, whether it was her over the top Mae West or Sonia Henney, she just was able to bring the house down. Many have compared her to Lucille Ball, and she herself considered Lucy a pioneer and someone that really began the idea that a woman could be funny and in control in Hollywood. But she never controlled things with the iron fist or with the way Lucy did in Desilu. It seems like she was always a ensemble person. The friendships that she had with Jim Nabors, with Julie Andrews, they seem to be really so sincere. And even what's considered, I guess, a little kitschy, the way at the end of the program, when Carol would sign the book. And you sort of figure that Carol probably has somewhere in her house a number of these autograph books. And you can tell that whether it was Vincent Price, who was on the show probably dozens of times, or it was Jimmy Stewart, or any one of her heroes, people wanted to be on her program because she welcomed them, she highlighted them, she gave them a chance to shine. In 1967, when she began her program, there were dozens of variety shows, and she outlasted them all. She was the last, and it really hasn't come back. One of the ways that you see Carol's great big-heartedness was her picking Vicki Lawrence out of a junior talent contest because of she looked like Carol to play in the skits, which again I think is probably the weakest of the program's history, is the Sis and Me, where Carol plays a sort of harried housewife married to Harvey Korman. Every one of those skits ends with the door slamming in someone's face and ending in a potted plant. But Vicki Lawrence started off as a novice, really, and she gave Vicki a chance not only to sing, and of course, Vicki had a #1 hit with the night the lights went out in Georgia, but she also got a chance to really do her chops in acting. The Mama's Family, Eunice and Mama, Vicki was able, to play this harridan of a mother, and Carol really was able to capture in those skits real pathos, real tragedy. And it was a way that many Southern families looked at it and saw their own foibles and issues really reflected. After Carol's show ended, you could find her on a number of programs. They did try to make another Carol Burnett type of show, but again, times had really ended. But whenever she showed up, she wasn't like Sid Caesar or Mel Brooks, for that matter, who was basically just playing it for as wide and broad as possible. She wanted to be part of that character. When she played Jamie's mother in Mad About You, she played it, for humor, but she played it as a character. She wasn't just there as an old television icon, in order to get laughs. She wanted to be part of the program. The only other actress that I think that comes close would probably be two of them, would be the two great SCTV actresses, Catherine O'Hara and Andrea Martin. Those two are in many ways the two Yorshim, I think, of Carol. The other one would probably be Tracy Ullman. And Tracy Ullman, I think, could probably, in many ways, she is more talented than Carol. Tracy Ullman can do more voices, more accents, more things. But Tracy is an acquired taste. I would say the four of them are probably, Carol as the queen, Tracy as sort of the new queen. And I would say in terms of the students who really, in many ways, were able to do a lot of the same things that Carol did, but not with the same sort of grace, Andrea Martin and Catherine O'Hara. You might remember, Yitzchak, that The Simpsons started on the Tracy Ullman show. The Simpsons started as a cartoon sort of in between skits.
That's pretty much all I remember from the Tracy Ullman show. I remember watching it, and I remember some of the skits, but I as a kid, The Simpsons is what we were looking forward to.
Well, Dan Castellano was a regular on Tracy Ullman, and therefore it made sense that Dan should use his voice for The Simpsons. And the same thing was true with Julie Kavner. Julie Kavner was a regular on many of the skits that she did with Tracy. But I really believe Carol is the progenitor of that. And I think the fact that so many of the old programs have been forgotten and you can't find them, and Carol continues to be available on streaming services everywhere, really indicates that there's a quality to her that has a timeless aspect to it. And again, there's one thing about being funny, being talented, but also being human, relatable, being gracious. And I think that's something that when we see people that have that, I think it could bring that out within us. So Yitzchak, that's my Barbie, my Barbie excuse to really talk about the great, unparalleled Carol Burnett. So Yitzchak, we can't forget the fact that we are thinking about the Churban, a destruction, a complete decimation of a city, a community, and a country. And this is what we are trying to sort of make real to ourselves. It's probably true, though, that when we think of Churban, we think, of course, of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the ultimate definition of Churban.
Well, I remember in college, the dean of my college where I attended, Rabbi Dr. Sokol, he encouraged us to read Homer's Iliad and the description of sacking of Troy to be somewhat of a taste of, and of what it was like to see a Churban of a city in ancient times.
But I think really what this underscores is the human terrible loss of any city, whether it's the city of Troy, whether it's Shiloh, whether it's Yerushalayim. And part of what perhaps is something we need to do is to comprehend what this means of the death and destruction. Hollywood decides in 1947, as you've informed me, to really have a film that documented the Manhattan Project and featuring a number of actual historical personages.
Yeah, the story was that Donna Reed was the one who actually came up with the idea for this movie, and it was President Truman who came up with the title to the movie, which was The Beginning or the End, which when I remember as a kid seeing that in the TV listings playing on TCM, it got my attention because it reminded me of a movie we spoke about a few weeks ago from Bird-Eye Gordon, The Beginning of the End. So I watched this movie as a youth, and I watched it over again today, actually, in preparation for the podcast. And it's an interesting movie because at that time in history was kind of a strange time for film, post-war. There was a lot of things were very different at that time, not yet, settled into what developed in the 50s. But this had very much, to me, a tom of a 50s, almost, sci-fi movie, even though it was a science fact movie. But a lot of the things that are presented there with the scientists and all the machines and radiation and the bomb and the actors who were in it. Brian Donlevy was in a lot of those movies, and he was here, and many other actors. So
right, and it was directed by pretty much an A-list director, Norman Taurog, and you also had the sort of the narrator and the person who plays the inventor of the bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was the star of this other film, was Hume Cronyn. And Hume Cronyn was, at that time, at the peak of his powers. He was a person who, we talked about him as in Brute Force, playing the sadistic Captain Muncie and Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. So this was really Hume Cronyn's time to play the characters and to sort of be this chameleon-like actor who could play anything. How does Hume Cronyn do in portraying Oppenheimer in this film?
I think he did a good job. And the interesting thing is, I think you showed me that there was a picture of Cronyn sitting with Oppenheimer. And even though some people said they don't really look alike, I think he kind of captured the look pretty well. Mm-hmm. I don't know enough about Oppenheimer's mannerisms or anything to say how much he captured his actual character very well or not, but as opposed to, the actor they had playing FDR certainly looked and acted like FDR, but FDR is kind of pretty easy to...
I think everybody was imitating him by that time. The guy, he'd been president for so long, since 1933. Yeah. So everybody had heard his voice every single Saturday afternoon.
And they didn't hide his handicap here.
The producers actually wanted Lionel Barrymore to play him, but because every single character, sort of, they needed permission from the family, especially those that were alive. The Roosevelt family did not want Barrymore playing FDR because Barrymore had made public that he had supported Dewey in the 44 election. So Barrymore was canceled out of playing this role. But you said the person who played it, although he might not have been wheelchair bound himself, he basically vindicated himself pretty well, playing a very public figure.
I think so. And, they had Ludwig Stossel playing Einstein. I don't think that was as good, and it was kind of overplayed. There's, this one scene with Einstein where they're approaching him and asking him to come and help them with this project. And
the Manhattan Project, of course.
Yeah, before they came up with the name already. And they approached him, saying, it's all based on your theory of matter and energy being the same thing. And he said, oh, you can't put it all on me. And this was kind of along the lines of, I think, a movie we discussed called It's a Big Country. And, where they talk about the melting pot of America. Einstein is presented as saying all these different scientists who contributed to the advances of
yes, many of them, of course, were European refugees who escaped the Nazis, and because of that, they could work for us in order to produce this bomb.
But each one he had to name. This one was an Englishman, and Curie was Polish, and Enrico Fermi, who is another character who plays prominently, probably more prominently than either Oppenheimer or Einstein, was Italian. So and then he said, you can't blame this all on me. And then they play him. What I understand, Einstein wasn't a particularly humble person. But in the show they present him as rather humble, saying, they ask, could you come talk to the president? He's like, well, I don't know Mr. Roosevelt so well. And then they said, well, I'm sure that the president knows you, sir. And then they said, well, maybe it'll be more polite if I write a letter.
Really, what's interesting, just besides the fact that the film featured living personages being played by various Hollywood character actors, the framing device of the film was quite unusual, I think. The idea that this was, it's sort of narrated by the Oppenheimer character, who describes the fact that this film is going to be placed in a time capsule to be open for 500 years in the future.
It actually opens with a newsreel, being presented. MGM has a newsreel, and the newsreel is showing the time capsule being placed into its holding place somewhere in the redwood forest. And, saying that, these trees have been around for thousands of years and have seen the rise and fall of various empires. And now here's where we're going to place this time capsule to be opened in the year 2447, 500 years in the future. And then it presents, this is the film that the people of the 25th century are about to see. And then after the opening credits, then you have Hume Cronin playing Oppenheimer, introducing the show, a rather pensive.
And that, of course, aligns with what the whole Christopher Nolan film is about, which is about Oppenheimer's angst in terms of, as he quote the Bhagavad Gita, in terms of now the destroyer of worlds has been unleashed. So Yitzhak, you mentioned to me off pod that this sort of Hindu reference is ironic, considering the fact that Oppenheimer is a Jew. And I think he was born in Europe, wasn't
he? I think he was born in America, Oppenheimer, but he was raised to be an atheist. I think he was raised with the Society for Ethical Humanism or something like that, or ethical culture. And he was very embarrassed of his Jewish roots. Both of his parents were Jewish, to the point where at that time Julius was considered a Jewish name. That's why he was J. Robert Oppenheimer, to not put any emphasis on his name Julius. But also along those lines, they said that later in his life, being dissatisfied, being raised in a very strictly atheistic atmosphere, and before that time of when he was involved in the Manhattan Project, as many Jewish people with a secular background who don't have any exposure to Yiddishkeit, I think he did it, earlier than it became much more popular in the 60s or 70s to learn about Buddhism and Hinduism and other Eastern religions.
He actually studied in Germany, He actually went to the University of Göttingen in Germany, and that's where he got his PhD from. He's clearly a genius, and, it's sometimes difficult to show geniuses on films. I know, again, the film you're talking about, the beginning or the end, it has a number of other characters in it besides the scientists. And some of them, of course, are created just for the film.
There were these two couples that are presented. One was a scientist and his wife, and the other one was a soldier and his fiance. And they were both, we followed them through pretty much the whole story, and they were both, there just before the bomb was going to be dropped. So it was, and the one scientist, he places his hand into the bomb and saves the whole thing from blowing up and saves 40,000 soldiers because he himself died because of that. He martyred himself. That story, apparently it was just a made up story for the movie. But I think, as I mentioned, the idea of making this full circle around of things that are in dispute, a pretty major part of this movie, was the idea that America dropped leaflets for 10 days before the bombing of Hiroshima on actually 10 different cities because they wanted to be a surprise. Which city telling the people you're not our enemies? If that we have a weapon that is like nothing ever seen before.
And of course, what would have been the purpose of the leaflets, Yitzchak? To evacuate, to move out of
to warn the people to evacuate, because the purpose of dropping the bomb was to end the war and save as many lives as possible by ending the war. That's already expressed, by how Truman is presented in the movie. And Truman was, very, like I said, very heavily involved in this movie. So therefore, they presented this, that they dropped these leaflets all over Japan, various cities, warning that this is coming. This, we want to save your lives, evacuate now, because, it's something very serious is going to happen.
Unlike what we're hearing about this new film, Christopher Nolan's film, that really posits the American politicians as the villains in many ways. This film pretty much, is a propaganda piece in the sense that America, or the American scientists and the officers, are all very noble.
We do see some inner, fighting. There's one scene where the one scientist who dies at the end, they're all about to drink a toast and drink some champagne, and he refuses. He doesn't want to drink it. He refuses to celebrate when they actually, synthesized plutonium for the first time. And then there's another scene. There's once they did that, there were a group of scientists who were Quakers, and they all asked. They said, this is now a munitions project and no longer a scientific project, so we have to excuse ourselves. And
so the film does give some voice to the pacifist movement in the United States, and it does indicate the fact that,
in a respectful way.
So the film has an aspect of thoughtfulness. It isn't just something like the propaganda pieces that were being commissioned during World War II.
No, it's not a big rah rah rah, but it is saying we had to do this. We had no choice. We saved lives doing this. And one of the lines that's very controversial was that they said, we dropped these leaflets for 10 days. That's 10 days more warning than we got at Pearl Harbor. And that was one of the things that a lot of people criticized about this movie. But and then I read throughout, after hearing about this, and remember seeing the movie as a student, I think still in high school, bringing up this question, and some of my teachers doubting whether or not this was true, and even in my research for this podcast, finding that a lot of people claimed that there never were any leaflets dropped. And a fascinating thing that I saw today was that Glenn Beck has a museum of American history. He actually has, because like we said, the leaflets were dropped on 10 different cities. I don't know if there are any leaflets that are left from Hiroshima or Nagasaki themselves, but he showed with his exhibit 2 actual leaflets that were dropped in Japanese warning the people to evacuate. So it actually was a historical fact that these leaflets were dropped, that the warning was made.
So let me play Nippon advocate here for a second and say that even though there was no warning to Pearl Harbor, the enormity of an atomic bomb versus a sneak attack on a military base in Hawaii, you can't really compare them. And really, let's think about it. This was a country that is it's a very different country than the United States. To expect the residents of 2 major cities to just pick up and just get to the hills, it's somewhat difficult to think that they would do that. We know that the world has changed. We know that the after effects of the radiation, the bomb, the fear, and the nuclear arms race, it really was the dawning of a whole new world. I can imagine that even if Glenn Beck is correct, that doesn't necessarily assuage a lot of the pain of what the Japanese civilians had to suffer. It's one thing if you have, you might read books about Hitler's willing executioners. Does that mean the Japanese people should they be considered combatants in this way, that they should be pulverized beyond recognition by the splitting of the atom? I don't know. But you can understand what Oppenheimer was going through. And I guess the Oppenheimer in the film, the Hume Cronyn character, does he exhibit any of what we know later was Oppenheimer's misgivings, a number of years later? Do you see any of that in the film?
Yeah, even because he is presented there at Los Alamos when the first bomb is detonated, and he certainly appears to be very, very uncomfortable.
So the film has a certain amount, as we say, the certain amount of nuance. So basically what you're saying, Yitzchak, is as though, if you don't want to spend the 3 hours and who knows how much money it is on these tickets to go, it's a fascinating way to see another early take of Hollywood presenting us this very, very important story. And I think it's part of the reason why, Yitzchak, although, again, we're talking about old films, I think part of the reason why so many people are fascinated with this is because it isn't just that it's a Chris Nolan film and it's 3 hours long. It's that we realize how central this event is, how, as you said, it's not only amazing, but it's life-changing, life-altering, to the point that one can almost think in messianic terms. We talk about the Churban, right? But this is sort of like Shisha Alpei Shana Havi Alma V'chad Chruv. You have the world basically advancing. There is slaughter and wars. This is more than just slaughter. This is complete annihilation. This is pulverizing.
Yeah, you do see not only the cloud, but then you see the plane flying over and seeing all the houses and buildings on fire, and they're expressing a fear that if there's another war, that's going to be the whole world is going to be on fire like that, and it's a tremendous, tremendous source of fear.
Well, yes, I think it's definitely worth checking out, and I would also recommend, although people are saying that it's a wonderful read, American Prometheus, which is the source material for Christopher Nolan's book about J. Robert Oppenheimer. One could also read about Hiroshima, the brilliant, brilliant short piece of reportage written by John Hersey, which he wrote originally, I believe, as a piece in the New Yorker, which eventually he turned into a sort of a novella-sized book called Hiroshima. And I think that is also something where I don't know if John Hersey has ever written, anything more moving than that. We are in a period where we are still trying to come to terms with our humanity and how that matches what we are able to accomplish in the fields of science. And this is something which I guess it's worth contemplating about. So connecting the positivity that Carol exhibited for all those 11 years, and I guess the seriousness and the humility that we really need to have. Carol, the humility that we all need, but especially humility in light of what man is able to do, and to bring out the best things that we can, to be able to marshal these forces, to be able to live up to the extreme responsibility of being guardians of the planet. There's light to the world. Or Lagoyim, Mamlechas Koyanim B'Koy Kodesh. So watch your step on the way out. We'll catch you next time. Be well. Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.